Last week we talked about giving to be blessed, but we shouldn't give to be blessed. We give because we are blessed, and we receive a blessing when we give with the right heart. And I talked about last week with you that Acts chapter 4 and 5, we get the compare and contrast of two different groups of people. You have, at the end of chapter 4, Joseph, a Levite who gives a piece of land that he has sold, gives all the profits to the apostles, lays it at their feet, and he's blessed because of it. Ananias and Sapphira, gave the same way in Acts chapter 5. They heard about this and they gave the money that they had sold the land for to the apostles, but they kept part of it back for themselves, and then they lied about it and they both dropped dead. The fact is, one gave from the heart. Ananias and Sapphira did not. They did not give from the heart. They gave from selfish ambition. See, the Lord looks at our gifts and what we give in different manners. In Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden after sinning. In chapter 4, it tells us that Adam knew Eve and she bore him a son named Cain. Cain was a worker of the ground, a farmer, and they had another son named Abel. Abel was a hunter. He was a rancher. He had sheep, he had goats, he had everything. And each of these boys would give sacrifices to the Lord. Cain from the ground, fruits and vegetables. Abel would give the best of his flock as a sacrifice to the Lord. And it says that God was pleased with Abel's sacrifice. And this upset Cain. And God even called him out and said, "Why does this upset you that I'm pleased with him?" He said, in other words, "Cain, you got a heart problem," which is an understatement, because then Cain went and killed Abel because he was jealous of God's blessing upon him. In Genesis chapter 6, we get the story of the flood. The world had become so corrupt that God was going to destroy it, but saved Noah, his sons, and their wives, and Noah's wife in the great ark with all the animals. So for 40 days and for 40 nights it rained. The rains came down, the floods came up, and then after 40 days and 40 nights, the rain stopped. It tells us the flood subsided, and in Genesis chapter 8, Noah and his family walk off the ark with all the animals. And the first thing that Noah does is he builds an altar to the Lord and makes a sacrifice to God. And God is pleased with this sacrifice and promises Noah that I will never ever flood the earth again and destroy the earth by rain. He said, I'm going to signify this promise with a rainbow, a covenant between Noah and God, not because of Noah's sacrifice, but because of the heart that Noah had in providing this sacrifice. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, Saul has become a corrupt king. God sends Samuel to the house of Jesse in Bethlehem to anoint the next king of Israel. And when Samuel gets there, he sees all the sons of Jesse big and they're strong and they would be kingly. But God says, remember, I don't look at the outward appearance of man. I look at the heart. So after all of the sons of Jesse, God says no. In fact, it says God has rejected each and every one of them. And then David is brought before him, and he is the one. And Samuel anoints the little ruddy and handsome kid because God looks at the heart. In fact, David is called the man after God's own heart time and time again because of his heart. Even when he sins, he still is considered a man after God's own heart, because the heart isn't corruptible. It's always focused on God. In 1 Kings chapter 17, we learn of the story of a prophet named Elijah. Elijah is told to go to a widow's house and ask for a drink and some food. Now there's a massive drought in all the land, and so Elijah gets there, he meets the widow and says, "Get me a drink of water." And as she's on her way to go get a drink of water for Elijah, he hollers out, "And also, make me some bread. I'm hungry." And she looks at him and says, "God is my witness. I have enough oil and I have enough flour to make a cake for my son and I, and then we will die." And he says, "That's fine. But first, make me something to eat. And I promise you that your oil and your flour will not run dry." And so she goes and prepares a meal for Elijah and her son, prepared to die. But the oil doesn't run out. The flour doesn't run out. And for many days they sat and ate. She received the blessing of God because of her heart, of what she was willing to give to God. That's what it's about. We receive the blessing from God for our giving because of our heart. When God knows our heart and knows our motives, that's all that matters to God. Doesn't matter what you give or how you give, it's why you give. Not to receive the blessing, not to receive the pat on the back, but to please God. Paul says that in all you do, work for the Lord. Work as you're working for the Lord and not for human masters. He says that's what it's all about. Living your life for Christ, doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's a heart matter. But beyond a heart matter, it's a motive matter. Is why are you doing what you do? Why do you say what you say? Why do you act like you act? Jesus' biggest foe and the people that put him on the cross, outside of the fact that it was the plan of God, I get that. But the biggest reason and people group were the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the religious leaders of the day, the people who knew what they should be doing but didn't do it. They were so high and mighty and living on their own petard that they neglected to see what they were supposed to do and why. They just followed the rules and regulations and made it about themselves. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is up on the side of the mountain, the Mount of Beatitudes they call it. And in Matthew chapter 5, it gives us the Beatitudes. We talked about this last week. Blessed are the poor in spirit and all the different blessings. But then in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says this. Verse 1, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what the right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And then in verse 5 he says, and when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they'll be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. And then in verse 16 it says, and when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, and their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. What Jesus was doing here in this just small section of his sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, is he was calling out the Pharisees and the Sadducees that love to do all these great things to boast about themselves. The men who should know better were all about themselves, not about God. The people who are experts in the law, the people who are experts in the Torah, the Old Testament, who knew all the stories of the Old Testament, who knew about Cain and Abel, who knew about Noah, who knew about Elijah, they made it about themselves. And Jesus is warning, don't be like them. When you pray, do it quietly. When you give, don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. When you fast, don't make yourself look all sick. Just do it quietly, because it's not about you. It's about God. When you give, it's about giving to God. When you pray, it's about praying to God. When you fast, it's about fasting before the presence of the Lord, not about you. That's the issue we have in society today. It's all about how many likes I can get. It's about how many people can look at me and say, oh, look at all the great things he's doing. And it's not just individuals. Churches do it all the time too. Of, look what we did. Look at this. Look at that. I don't care. Do it for God, not for you. Don't be trying to get people to say, look how great they are. Look how great he is. Look how great she is. Give from the heart. Samuel, when he looked at the older boys, they were it. They were big. They were strong. They were just like Saul. Saul stood head and shoulders taller than everybody else in all of Israel, and God picked him. Everybody looked at Saul and said, that's what a king should be. But over time, Saul's heart hardened because his heart wasn't focused on God. David was the runt of the litter, young and ruddy and scrawny, the outcast of the family that simply was put out into the fields to take care of the sheep. But God looked at him and said, that's what I want. Somebody who has a heart for me. This is clearly evident. All of what Jesus said right there in Mark chapter 12. I love when Jesus' teaching is going to be put into real world. I can see it. This is it. Chapter 12. I'm going to actually begin in verse 38. It says, and in his teaching he said, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and like greetings in the marketplaces, and have the best seats in the synagogue and the places of honor at the feasts, who devour widows' houses, and for the pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. And here's my favorite. And he sat down opposite the treasury, and he watched the people putting in money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box, for they all contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything that she had, all that she had to live on. That example is exactly what happened in 1 Kings 17 with Elijah and the widow. The widow gave everything. Jesus is saying, this woman right here wasn't about herself. She didn't make a scene and say, look at me, I'm giving everything I've got. It's not much, but I'm giving it all. She put it in quietly and walked away, while the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes put in all this great abundance of what they had. And they said, look at me. Look at my fancy robe. Look at all I got. I'm so blessed by God. God doesn't care about any of that, and neither should you. Be like the widow. Be like this poor beggar. Be like David. Be like Noah. Be like Abel. In the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul tells the church in Rome in chapter 12, in verse 1, what it's all about. And I'll close out in this. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual act of worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by the testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. God doesn't care how much money you have in the bank account. God doesn't care how much you put in the offering plate. God doesn't care what you do, how much you do of it. What he cares about is, are you doing it for the right motives? When Ananias and Sapphira came in and they lied about giving all that they had received for the land, they point blank asked Ananias, why not just give it? Nobody told you you had to give everything. Why not just give what you felt like giving? God would have accepted that because it would have come from the heart. But because you made it about you, you get nothing except for pain and suffering and eternal damnation because your heart is not turned towards God. Paul says, offer yourselves as living sacrifices. That's what he asks. That's pure spiritual worship before the Lord. So when you give with a thankful heart. Give with a grateful heart. Give with a heart that is turned towards God. Forget about the world. Don't be conformed to it. Don't be like the Sadducees and the Pharisees who stand on the street corner praising themselves. Let your life praise God. Have a great week.